It's the whole reason that EOS has this 90-day pulse where every 90 days you come up for air. You've got to get out of the business to work on the business, looking at it from a higher level. And when we're setting rocks, we are prioritizing. What are the 3 to 7 most important things that must get done this quarter? What are the most important things that must get done? And I tell my clients all the time, I'd rather you get these 3 things done 100% than halfway do 25 other things.
Welcome to the Scalability Code, the podcast that helps you get out of the shit show and start growing your business. And now for your host, Matt Haney.
Here we are again on another episode of the Scalability Code. My name is Matt Haney. I'm your host today. We have Amy Johannesen from Dallas, Texas. Amy, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, other than the fact that, what is today? I don't even know what today is. Thursday. Monday in Austin, it was like 104 degrees or something, which was a little much to deal with.
I was down in Fredericksburg on Tuesday, and when I got in my car at the end of the day after a session, my temperature in my car said 107.
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
like, roll down the windows, turn on the AC. Let's just give that a minute before I drive back.
It is definitely overwhelming a lot of the time, but I have to remind myself that we have the other side of the season too that is hopefully not as miserable. So we just have to remember that the winters are not as bad as others' winters, right?
So true. Very true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I always start our interviews the same way, and that is I encourage 2 things. I want you to go back and think about someone in your life at a formative age, that could have been last year or when you were 2, that was an entrepreneur, that you were around, that impressioned upon you your view of entrepreneurship or helped you get to where you are. I'll give you a second to process that. And then I want to go back to your beginnings of an entrepreneur, because you didn't start as an implementer, you started as an entrepreneur, and I'm guessing there's a story there. Would love to hear that too. So those 2 things help us form a similar conversation. So question 1, do you know anybody that comes to mind that impressioned you as a young human?
Absolutely. It was my dad.
Tell me.
My dad technically is my stepdad, but I introduced he and my mother when I was 10 years old. When I was in 5th grade, my mother had recently been divorced and my best friend's uncle had recently been divorced. So we thought it'd be really cool to be cousins. So we set them up on a blind date and then they got married. So it worked out nicely for me. So he, at the time, he was living in East Texas, not in Dallas. And so, of course, I had to find him a job. So I remember going through the wad ads and circling it with the marker and finding him a job. And so he eventually did end up moving to Dallas before he married my mom. And I found him a job, and he's a pharmacist by training. So he worked a few pharmacy jobs in the Dallas area, ultimately went to work for kind of a startup. So they were doing transplant medications. Main company was based out of New York. They ran it into the ground, shady financials. Some people went to prison, things that he was not aware of. But when he left that business, he thought, I'm not going to work for anyone else, because he had autonomy here in Dallas and got to basically run it on his own. So he decided to start a business. And so he started that company when I was in college. So I helped him grow and sell a company when I was in college. And I was like employee number 1.
What did he do?
He started a specialty pharmacy. So rather than transplant medications, because he did have a non-compete, we went into providing medication for dialysis patients across the state of Texas. So prescriptions, if you think about it, it's like a subscription service. When you're on maintenance meds, you have to take them every month. So there was monthly recurring revenue. It just kind of made sense. And this market, the dialysis market, was dramatically underserved in Texas. And so he saw a need and thought he could go fill that need and help people. So I would go to class in the mornings and then come in the afternoons and make patient files and answer phones and put together boxes because we were shipping medications. And so that started when I was 18. He ended up selling that company about 3 years later and went to work for the company that bought him, took an employment contract, flew around the country firing people, hated it, and said, I'm not going to work for anyone else. I'm going to work for myself. So
That's so cool.
After college, we talked about it and was like, hey, I've always just wanted to own a little small town pharmacy. Let's do it. And so he did. And in doing so, we had a couple small local pharmacies. And then all the people that found out he was back in business started calling him dialysis medications, transplant medications, because there was no more non-compete. So we ended up selling the retail, closing the doors, becoming just a closed door pharmacy. And we did specialty medications across the state, got out of dialysis and transplant, but focused on mental health. So providing medication to long-term care patients, specifically in that IDD, the intellectually and developmentally disabled space.
Wow.
I worked a job in high school. I worked at the mall. I worked a couple jobs, and I had a degree in psychology. So my dad always said that when I asked, would you like fries with that? I could say it with feeling. He thought my psychology degree was kind of silly. And then I worked with him growing businesses. And it turns out I use my psychology degree every day in what I do now.
Right.
So joke's on him,
you.
right?
Joke's on you, Dad. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
exactly.
And how long did he run that pharmacy business? And sort of what's
So we had the second business, we sold the first one. And then when he came back in, we opened that and we were partners. We had a 75-25 split. And so we grew it together and ran that business for 17 years. We implemented EOS with Mark Winters from 2012 to 2016. So that was our intro into EOS. Yeah. We were in debt. We were throwing money and people at problems like most entrepreneurs do. And we had no idea how bad it was. I think we survived just based on dump luck. But then when we brought Mark in and we really put some systems and structure and processes and the right people in the right seats behind the business, we were able to do more work with less people, obviously making our business more profitable. We eventually got out of debt, positioned for sale, and sold off that business. So we sold the bulk of it in November of 2016, the last remaining piece in early 18. My dad became an implementer in 18, and I stayed home with my kids. I had twins. So I jumped back into the community in about 2020, waited for the branding merger and all the EOS one and all of that, the licensed agreements. And then I became an implementer in 2021.
That's so great. What a cool story. Is your dad still doing implementer work?
Yep, absolutely.
That's so fantastic.
He's an expert implementer in our community now. So he's been around a little bit.
Is he in Dallas too?
He is.
Well, what a cool story. I had no idea. Obviously, it takes a special human to work with their parent, and it takes a special human to work with their child. And I've seen it in multi-generation businesses, which I know you have as well. And I've seen it in my own family. And, you know, it's challenging, Amy. I don't know if I need to tell you that, but working with your dad.
We had our moments. We absolutely had moments where I would not answer the phone on the way home because I'm like, I'm switching gears. I'm going home to my family. I'm not doing this with you right now.
Boundaries, as my psychology friends would say. That's very
We had
cool.
some yelling, screaming moments. But fortunately, he was a natural visionary and I was a natural integrator. So that worked out really harmoniously. Once we got to the point that we understood each other better and could recognize, like, before he sent an email, he would send it to me because it was going to be awful and I needed to wordsmith and proofread. And so I knew those things about him. And then he knew that I was going to keep, the trains on track and the trains on time. And he trusted me to do that. So once we got to that level of trust and really understanding each other better, we kept it very separate. I mean, we did not talk about the business at Thanksgiving dinner. And we didn't talk much about the family when we were at work because these were two separate roles that we played.
What a very special story. And I've heard the opposite of that story, which is all we do is talk about work. And our siblings are tired of this. And my wife gets mad at me because all we do is talk about stuff. And so good for you for acknowledging, and both of you for seeing those boundaries and trying your best to stick to them. That's a really cool story. Do you guys now talk to each other about trials and tribulations inside the in-session room?
Yes, probably more so now than we did when we actually worked together. And my mom's like, so are we doing this? She gets so put out. She's like, stop talking about it.
Another visionary story. That's awesome.
He's my go-to guy. When I have a challenging situation with a client or a challenging session, he's the guy that I call and vent to. So
that's
it's
so
good.
Cool.
Or he helps me through, when I don't know what to do. I'm like, hey, here's what happened. What would you do? And he gets curious and asks the right questions and we get there.
Have you ever seen him in session?
So we share a session room. So we have one common space. He's my landlord. I rent from him. So we have one common space that has a large conference room and a smaller conference room. And so we have both been in session on the same day at the same time. So we cross each other during breaks and lunch and such. So
that's so cool. Yeah, you guys should do a switch where you just okay, he's going to come, you're in session together and you just switch session rooms and you're like, all right, I'm going to take this IDS topic.
That is something that would be crazy.
All right, well, I'm going to jump into a few more questions. And if you have any questions along the way, obviously jump in. So I know EOS well, obviously you do too. And hopefully some of the people that are listening have an understanding or a curiosity around it. Common question I ask folks is, are there any specific industries that you find yourself specializing in? Yes, I know the caveat. EOS is, I do believe this, is a one-size-fits-all product. I have seen it. I have a $200 million client currently, and I have a $2 million client. They all benefit from the principles of EOS. But from an industry perspective, do you see any overlap or do you have any industries that you gravitate towards, or you get one referral one place and it sort of spirals down to 7 people in a similar space?
Not specifically. My only source of growing or biz dev is referral. I grow by referral. So I work with clients that I'm recommended to by existing implementers or existing clients. So it just grows organically, which is amazing. I don't think that I have a specialty or a preferred group. I work with a lot of trades and I work with professional services. And they all have the same problems. Like you said, one size fits all. We like to say industry agnostic because when it comes down to it, your biggest problem is usually people. And second from that, it's process or lack thereof. And so if we can get those things handled and get everyone rowing in the same direction and doing the same thing the right and best way every time, I mean, that just improves the organization so very much. One common thread that I will say, most of my clients are faith-based organizations, openly based organizations, beginning the session in prayer. I work with a lot of family businesses, which I think is common in the entrepreneurial space. I mean, when you start a business, you typically hire the people you know and trust, what happens to be family. Now, like you said before, it doesn't always go as smoothly as it did with my dad and I. Sometimes that blows up, but people evolve and they eventually get there.
I've had a couple folks who work in the faith-based industry, specific, like in churches and nonprofits and stuff. And I don't know, that common grounding amongst a group of people just creates even more unity and more understanding, and the intentions are definitely there. That's really cool.
The mission with those is generally the impact that they're making. And so that's very emotion driven and helps create that alignment. The next thing I was going to say is, yes, I work with 4 nonprofits currently. So again, based on impact, they're very, emotion and business driven or mission driven. The one thing I will say about working with nonprofits is they have to run like a business. It's not going to work if you don't run it like a business. And so when I talk about profit, some of them at the start of the relationship will be like, oh, well, we're nonprofit. And I said, right. But if you're not making money, you're not making an impact. How are you going to do what you set out to do if you're not watching all of this stuff?
My wife started a nonprofit that served underserved women, bringing nutrition and fitness services to them. I did right out of social work school, and we kind of co-created that model together. But to your point, the quicker a nonprofit runs their nonprofit like a business, the more people they can serve, right? And
Absolutely.
I think getting to that point is hard for folks because, as I remember in our fundraising, it was always one of those things as an operator, I would struggle because it's like, well, how much of your budget goes to operations? And I'm like, without operation, your budget is useless.
Right. All of it.
Stop measuring against what percentage of this dollar goes to ops versus the mission. But to your point, the quicker we can get businesses to run like that, the better off we are. Do you ever struggle? This is something common I've always seen. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Like, people that need EOS the most sometimes can't afford it. Do you see that in the nonprofit work that you do, where it's like, man, I could help them raise the money if we had the platform in place to then go systematize the business to raise money? Do you ever see a budget challenge when you're working with smaller nonprofits?
So I actually have some very dear friends who started a nonprofit recently to raise money for the treatment of traumatic brain injury for first responders and veterans. Great friends, the people we do life with. Like, we go to church on Sundays, we have our birthday parties, we spend the night at each other's houses, our kids and such. And so they actually started with zero, and I was a volunteer, and I watched the way things were run the first year and then into the second year. And finally I had to throw my hands up and be like, can y'all stop? They're all volunteers. This is not their full-time jobs, right? It's just a passionate project. And so I do implement for them pro bono. And I like to have at least one pro bono client because it makes a difference. And it's important to me to give back to the community that we raise our kids in. But with the others, because they are running like businesses, they've got budgets built out for years and they just have to build this into the budget. A lot of those, there's always a board. The board always wants to meet me and they want to understand what EOS is. And so I'm happy to do the presentation for them as well. But I make it very clear that I work with the leadership team. I do not work with the board.
Right.
So this is the team that's going to make the difference. This is the team that's going to have an impact on the day-to-day operations and ultimately serving your clients. I don't take phone calls from board members. I don't want to talk about the visionary or the integrator behind their back. That's not happening.
Don't put me in that spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I had a client, this is kind of a cool story, a third generation jewelry business and he actually became an implementer, which was cool. But my point is, family-based businesses, do you find yourself seeing family businesses more than not? Or is that something that you gravitate to? Or is there a pattern there of you working with folks that have family members in the business?
If I audited all of the clients that I've worked with, I would say probably 75% of them had at least one family member in the business somewhere.
That is so
So fathers
fascinating.
and sons,
I
husbands
love
and
it.
wives, definitely,
That's so
definitely.
cool. And you have the perspective, as did the client I had in the jewelry space of, so his mission, as he transitioned to generation 3 and stepped out of the visionary seat per se, and his son stepped in, he went out and his mission was to just focus on family-based businesses, multi-generation. And it's great because you have perspective that most people can say they understand. Oh, I can only imagine. Well, no, I can tell you what it's like working
You
firsthand
cannot
for 17
imagine.
years. Yeah,
Right.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges as a fractional integrator I struggle with is getting EOS to stick 2 levels, 1 level down from the leadership team.
Mhm.
And I always try to get the leadership team stabilized, do the things we need to do in order to be effective with the vision. But do you have any thoughts or feedback around how people who are struggling to get that accountability chart, EOS further down the accountability chart, any tips or tricks or things that you work around for there?
I think, quite frankly, that the proven process in EOS, our proven process, that rollout piece has been a missing piece for quite a while. I teach the leadership team and then they're responsible for rolling this out, but every client is different in how and when, and their ability or capacity to roll that out differs. The tool that we use ultimately to identify those gaps is the organizational checkup, which I review with every client in our annual planning every year. We are rating things on a scale of 1 to 5. And if it's not a 5, we need to identify the issue. Why doesn't everyone have a number on a scorecard? Why doesn't everyone in your organization have rocks? Let's identify those issues so that we can solve them at the root. And then we take rocks towards getting it there. That works to some degree. Some clients, it's just like you can lead a horse to water, but they're not ever going to get there. I will say that there are 2 expert implementers in our community that recently put out a rollout book, and it is
Yes, I love it.
fabulous.
It's like
Yeah.
I'm obviously as an integrator, I'm like, yeah, traction's good, I guess, but really rollout, that's
Right.
where
That's like the how-to guide to get everyone on the same page and rowing in the same direction. And I'm so excited that they put this book out. I've sat through their deep dive workshops a time or two, and we actually have a big event coming up in Dallas on September 14th. And Beth is going to be there, and she's going to facilitate a rollout workshop. And every one of our guests gets a copy of the book. So I feel like
so awesome.
this is what the market has finally been missing, has been waiting for all this time, and we're finally able to give it to them. So it's going to be great.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I had Beth on when she was doing the launch, and it was cool to talk to her. She also does Bad Boss. Isn't her do a Bad Boss podcast too?
I have not listened to the podcast, but
I-
she did help with The Great Boss with writing the book that Renee Bohr and Gino Wickman did, How to Be a Great Boss. And she does facilitate a number of Great Boss workshops. And so I hadn't heard about Bad Boss.
I was on a podcast, and I think it was hers, maybe I'm wrong, where we talked about failures as a leader. I thought it was really empowering for me to go back through some of the challenges I had through my leadership and mistakes that I've made and talk about being vulnerable around what it takes to lead businesses.
The thing about leadership especially is oftentimes great players are rewarded with promotion. And so we end up promoting up the people who helped us grow the business, but we give them very little leadership training and very little management training. And just because you were a great player doesn't mean you're necessarily wired to be a great coach. And particularly if you haven't been taught how to do those things. So LMA is one of the things we teach in EOS. It's leadership plus management equals accountability. People always come to us with, how do I hold my people accountable? Like, well, first of all, you have to lead appropriately and you have to manage appropriately for accountability to even have a chance in your organization. And that's the part that's often missed. These inputs will create that output. But if we don't focus on the input, we're never going to get there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I did check because I'm not crazy. Bad Boss Confessional, Beth's podcast, which is fun, talking about vulnerability and challenges of being a leader, which I thought is fabulous. You should go listen to my.
I'm going to make a note right now. I'm going to check
it was it was a failure on epic proportions. That so anyway, that's a whole nother story. So you mentioned this. I love the organizational checkup. I think it's fabulous. But something you also said about perhaps setting rocks around those missing pieces for going down, rolling it out down lower. And I think that's something that as people grow and set rocks. They think about how do we move the business forward in terms of increasing revenue or profitability. But the reality is like setting a rock around rolling out EOS 2 levels down should be something the leadership team is accountable for, that you as an implementer, knowing that that is a rock, can help with between sessions. And I thought that was an interesting point you put in there.
I find often that, the accountability chart is living and breathing in your organization, and it's changing and it needs to be constantly updated. But people kind of set it aside. It's like they do the exercise once and then they kind of set it and forget it. And when the accountability chart starts to erode, you have people in your organization who don't really know where they fit, what they're accountable for specifically, who they're accountable to. The way to solve that is with making sure that everyone has rocks, making sure everyone has a scorecard measurable, and that they're in the right meeting pulse, that they're attending the right level 10 meeting. And if we could keep that cadence and keep that consistent, that's really the key to rollout, because these tools were already designed and they're already there for you to use. But so often leaders and managers think that they need to have meetings, but they don't really carry that out and they don't impress the importance upon the rest of the team. And that's where they're missing things. And really, they're not leveraging their employees. They're not utilizing their talents to the best of the ability because they haven't taught them how to be successful and they haven't told them what matters. When you've got a measurable on a scorecard, you know exactly what your piece in the system is, and you know it's important. But if I don't give you the privilege of having a measurable on a scorecard, then I'm not telling you whether or not you're doing a good job. You should be able to leave every week and know I did my job because all of my numbers are on track.
The scorecard is green. Okay, let's talk about visionaries. This is my favorite topic. Like I said, I've done this 10 years. I'm on my 16th engagement, and I've seen just what I think is every visionary possible. Turns out that's not the case because we're all unique individual humans.
You are listening to the Scalability Code. I'm your host, Matt Haney, founder of Sinclair Ventures, and we help visionary entrepreneurs like you get out of the shit show and focus on growing your business. We offer fractional COO and leadership coaching services that free up that brain of yours to focus on what's next. Learn more about us at sinclairventures.com. Now back to it.
But I want to talk about overlap because I talked about it earlier in some of the client work that you do, and I'd love to get your feedback on any overlap. Again, you, your father, everyone in the EOS community, your husband and his work, get to see visionaries. What common themes do you see? And how do you coach around them? Or just give me an example of some that you may have a unique interest in helping navigate.
Commonalities in many visionaries, usually, they're big picture. They're very passionate. They're great storytellers. My dad is a great storyteller. He has that big personality. They're very engaging because they're so passionate about what they do, which is all great. That's what led them to start the business. And it's probably what equipped them to drive the business for so long. But that alone can only get the business so far. I find sometimes that a visionary is so passionate and so excited. They're like the buyer. That's what I call them. Because no matter what comes their way, it's like this shiny object. Yeah, that's a great system. Hey, we're going to put in that, and it's like they're giving their employees or giving their team whiplash because no one can keep up with the excitement and the enthusiasm. And when everything is amazing, you don't know, as someone who's supposed to go execute, what is this more important than the other thing he told me last week? I mean, I don't know what's more important. The other thing that I find is visionaries, this is their baby. They started this business. They built it from the ground up. They have that founder's dilemma where they can't really see the other side. They know they need help, but they don't trust anyone enough to let go of things. And so they hold things really tight and they insert themselves into every little part of the business. And once they can get to the level where they actually have trusted individuals and they let everyone do what they hired them to do and let go of the reins a little bit, the business functions so much better. But some of them are just so set on the way that it's always been, or that's not how we do things here. And not even just visionaries. I mean, it can be longtime employees, and oftentimes the visionaries don't want to let go of the longtime employee because, they've been here for 20 years and they helped us get here, which is great. And we've rewarded them for their participation by giving them a paycheck every week. But sometimes those people aren't necessarily going to help get you to the next level. Visionaries have a real hard time with letting go of those sacred cows. And I've seen that play out several times, and it usually ends poorly. When they finally get to saying the things that should have been said years ago, there's already so much animosity and so much contempt and resentment that's built up that it doesn't go so well.
You mentioned something about prioritization, and it triggered me because I just had a call in this big business I'm working in, literally leadership team of 10, 3 individual businesses inside one holdco, if you will, cumulative revenue of 200 million and EBITDA in the high teens. Very successful business, incredibly dysfunctional. And it's a challenge that we're struggling with. But one of the things is, sometimes I get parachuted into meetings and they're asking me to help sort of see through some of the stuff. And the integrator, the fractional integrator in this case, gets to be ignorant. I get to come in and ask questions that are irrelevant to the operations of the business, but more relevant onto how we're executing, right? I don't know the subject matter expertise, which is why I'm here. But one of the things that came up today with this tech company is they were trying to work through how they prioritize development needs for the business, development meaning software development or tech development. And I said, somebody pull up a simple dev sheet that shows all the list of the things. And I'm not kidding. The left column said priority, Amy, and there was nothing in that column. And I said to them, am I missing something here? Because we have a long list of things that we need to do and all the stuff around what that means. And the priority column is literally vacant. It's there, but it's empty. How do we know what's first? Just because it's first on the list, does that mean it's first? No. We're working on the one that's 7 rows down, cell number 8. And I'm like, but so I was like, time out. Who makes the ultimate decision on what priorities are? I do. Okay, great. We'll fill this out and get alignment, because it was just a simple thing that will go a long way for everyone towards clarity, which is we're all marching to the same drum beat. Here are the things we're working on. And I do find sometimes those simplest of realizations go the longest, because just like nobody talks about that. They talk about the specific subject matter they're talking about, not the prioritization of it. So that triggered me. So thank you for calling out visionaries and priorities, because as I say, the list is long. And if you're going to take something from the top, then you got to take something from the bottom. Like we can't just continually run and not solve.
Right. Well, and that's the whole reason that EOS has this 90-day pulse, where every 90 days you come up for air. You've got to get out of the business to work on the business, looking at it from a higher level. And when we're setting rocks, we are prioritizing. What are the 3 to 7 most important things that must get done this quarter? Sure, everyone has a running to-do list in their heads and all of these things that they have going on, but let's get out of those weeds and really prioritize and get alignment as a team. What are the most important things that must get done? And I tell my clients all the time, I'd rather you get these 3 things done 100% than halfway do 25 other things. You're not getting anywhere. You're not gaining traction. You're just spinning your wheels. I have talked to a team that showed me this spreadsheet of all of their strategic initiatives. And I'm like, okay, but who owns this? And who owns that? And when's it due? And what's more important? And they had no idea. These are just all the things that we are working on. I'm like, who's working on it? Yeah. Oh, we all are. Are you?
Yeah, so. Of course we are. All right, a couple other questions I think that'll spur some great conversation for us. So give me an example or 2 that come to mind. Actually, let me rephrase that. Think back to your last session or your last 2 sessions and pull out some ideas or examples where there was visionary integrator misalignment or miscommunication. And tell us a story around kind of how you uncovered it and how you put it into perspective and perhaps diffuse or realign.
2 sessions ago. So I've been working with a team for about 4 years. There has been significant turnover on the leadership team, not uncommon in this process. And the visionary, bless his heart, he has such grand ideas, and he reads every book and listens to every podcast and learns about every tool. And he is constantly trying to piece together and bring more things into the room. And every 90 days when I see them, it's like, oh, we're going to do this now. And oh, now we're using this. And I'm like, wait, what? And I've called it out more than once. And I told him, you are half-assing EOS. And so you're going to get half-assed results. And if you're not committed, this is just a really expensive project and you're spinning your wheels and we're not getting anywhere. Oh, no, we're committed. So about a year ago, 18 months ago, he hired his wife as his integrator. She is very integrator minded, had, run a trauma center for 20 years. I mean, she knows exactly what she's doing. She has come in and observed and made some changes here and there, but really just trying to stabilize and systemize the organization from where she sits. But everyone still reported to him. And so I was like, then she's not the integrator, right?
Right.
And previous conversations, the ops guy would say, well, we don't have an accountability chart. We have this other thing. We have an org chart and we have a responsibility matrix and we have all of these things. So that's just what they've been doing. They've been filling it out and going through the motions for me, but still operating differently. And in this session, we talked about the accountability chart because they've made big moves and they're about to merge with another company and it's going to be huge. And so it's like, we've got to get clarity on where everyone sits. What are they responsible for?
Right.
Who are they accountable to? Let's be clear. And in doing so, she calls out, she's like, if we have this, why do I have to fill out this thing and this thing and this thing? Why does it live in 3 different places? And he's like, well, that's just how we do it. And she's like, no, I'm going to do it this way. If this is my rock this time, I'm going to do it this way. And I was just like, oh my gosh, the clouds have parted. I'm like, hallelujah. Finally, someone who stands up to him. And he's like, you know what? And they use 90.io as their software. And she's like, we are paying for this. We need to maximize it. She finally did all of their dashboards and their spreadsheets are now finally in scorecards in the software. That was her rock last time. And so this time it's going to be accountability chart. And I'm like, this is great. I think that she just sat back and observed long enough. But I will say that there's only one person left on that leadership team that was here when she started 18 months ago. So she has certainly made some powerful moves. And it's for the better of the organization. Absolutely. Yeah. He was the type that just couldn't get out of his own way,
What was it like watching those two come to the room and have conversations around what your seat is versus what you're not?
For me, it was great. I'm probably not one of those great managers of people who's super empathetic and sensitive. So I was like, cheering her on. I'm like, yes, more power to you, sister. It was fabulous. I have seen, however, I've seen so much conflict in the session room that I'm comfortable with it now. And I know how valuable it is. I mean, healthy conflict, there's a difference between being disrespectful and, personal attacks. I have had fathers and sons pretty much almost go to blows in my session room where things are being slammed and one of them walked out and, we had to de-escalate the situation to continue the day. I've seen this kind of stuff. I have a couple other couples who work seemingly well together, but they're in very different seats, very different roles. They're not visionary integrators. I had one client with visionary integrator, husband and wife, and 2 consecutive annuals. She pulled me aside and told me, if you can't save this business, then I'm going to have to leave. And I was like, you're going to leave the business? She's like, and the marriage. And I'm like, whoa. So
that's some weight.
Don't put that on me. That is a different conversation with a therapist. That is not my responsibility. But
just because I have a degree in psychology doesn't mean I'm your therapist.
Right. Sometimes it can get very uncomfortable. That team was very uncomfortable. And we do not work together anymore because it was too uncomfortable.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about culture? Because it's one of the things I'm struggling with in a couple businesses and 2 clients I have right now. And by struggle, I mean every company struggles with it to a certain extent. Have you come across maybe a tidbit or 2 around, turning around culture? And I don't mean writing the core vision and values on the wall. I mean helping people operate differently so that they're creating culture. Have you give us any stories or any advice you see around how people have been able to create something more positive in a time where it's really a struggle?
I've seen this a couple different ways. One example that I will share, I had a visionary integrator duo, and within a couple sessions, it became clear to me that the integrator was kind of rallying all the people with her, but the visionary was the bad guy. And it wasn't her company. It was his company. And she was just a trusted member of the team. And he trusted her so much. Like, she watched his kids and she was his integrator and she was hands-on when he didn't live in the city where the business was. And it's like she was trying to really drive a wedge between the staff and him. The culture was seemingly good, but this was the big thing that no one was addressing. I saw it, but I don't work in your business every day. I don't know exactly what's going on. I can only ask the questions and hold up the mirror and point to the tools and ultimately get you there. And so that's what happened. About a year in, he decided to let her go. And he was terrified. We had conversations about it. And he's like, well, if she's not there to run the day-to-day, I'm going to have to do it. And I'm like, well, it is your company. How important is it to you?
You signed up for this, Mr.
What's the
Entrepreneur.
trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And he ended up letting her go. And there was some pretty big turnover because some people didn't get what was going on. And of course, we're siding with her. And those people left. A year later, the culture was completely different. Like, he was there every day. He was rallying the troops. People supported him. They were finally buying in because it wasn't so segmented and she wasn't there driving the wedge between the two of them. And so it's been really great to see how they've advanced since then. And he did a podcast with Pam Kosanke a couple years ago to talk specifically about this subject. So that was really great.
Did he replace that integrator? Did he find someone to sit in that seat, or did he take over the role?
He stepped into the role. He's tried to replace it, and he's been back into the role. I just had a session with them this past Tuesday, and he's finally got the right person in the right seat.
Nice.
And the whole dynamic was different. Now, it has taken a while. It has taken him 3 years since then, but he's finally got the right person, and it was the best session they've ever had.
That's so awesome.
It was kind of a revolving door of leaders for a while. I mean, like sometimes there'd be 6 people in the room, sometimes there was 8. This person would move from this seat to that seat. It's like he was just kind of throwing things up against the wall for a while. Finally got the right 4 people in the room, and it's running so much smoother. So it's really,
That's
really
fantastic.
Great.
Love a happy ending.
Okay, so another team where culture has been impacted. I recently started working with a company who's been in business for 40 years, and they've had the same core values on the wall for 40 years. It was owned by a couple. Most of the employees have been with them forever, had grown up in the organization. So the operator, who was basically running the business for them, bought out the couple as they're retiring because they are very much retirement age. He has been in the company for 30 years. I think he started when he was 18, and he's 48 now. So he's been in the company 30 years. Like it's a landscaping and nursery business. So like started working outside, and now he's running the whole show. So he has bought out the family and knew about EOS, has read all the books, and said, yes, we absolutely want to do this. So after that transaction occurred, he was introduced to me by a mutual associate, and we started implementing EOS. Well, one of the exercises that we do in the first 3 days in the vision building day is walk through an exercise to discover your core values. And so that's a sensitive subject when everyone at the table has been in this company for 20, 30 years and the core values are on the wall. And I say, okay, can I get your trust for just a moment? I know this is what it's always been, but can we walk through this exercise? And if we land in the same place, cool. You don't have to change the signs. But what if it's better? And, the values that were painted on the wall may not be what's living and breathing in this organization currently. And so we walked through the exercise. They changed the core values, and they were so happy. They were so
were they
bought
different,
in.
Or just, obviously they were differently what to change them, but materially, what was, and that's probably a long story.
It was materially different in that it was more about who they are. The other stuff was like what we do, kind of like a pledge or a promise. And so now they have to go back to the office and they have to give a core value speech, and they have to introduce these new core values, and change is hard. And it was the coolest thing. So since then, they're doing like a monthly core values winner. And so they made this big wrestling belt. And so every month they get together for like their little staff meeting or whatever, and they like call it out like an announcer, and like, the person we're describing, he stands tall at 6'2" and and he likes this and he does that. And, it's this big celebration. They play the walkout music, when the person comes up to accept their belt. And now it's such a big deal every month to see who's going to get the belt. And everyone is bought into it. All of the people are living and breathing these core values now that actually live in the business.
That's very cool. What an
it's
opportunity
really neat to watch.
Have a person who's been in a company so long and have a transition, and that they make it, or a transition of core values after they're being there for so long, and you spin that into a positive. And I love the belt. I had a client once. It was a mechanical, electrical, plumbing contractor, and they had a similar core value shout out monthly, and they made this trophy that was like a smorgasbord of crap that they found in the shop, and they welded up this trophy, and it became the most coveted thing, and it would sit back in the corner. And I love those simple things that are impactful, right? Having that trophy on your desk, or that feeling of embodying the core values, it's quite a thing, especially if you don't do it. And it's perfectly clear you haven't had this trophy. Let's have a conversation around the fact that you may or may not be embodying the values that we all believe in.
Right.
Last question on this, and it's a tough one. When you come across a visionary who is not living by the values he or she created, and as an integrator, I've been in this situation more than once, having to be the person that says to them, hey, I got to give you a review. I've got to tell you how you're doing and not, is a hard thing to do. Do you see those circumstances where you as the implementer are put in the situation, or you willingly get in that situation to talk to that person about their lack of core values?
I've only had one, and like I said, they're no longer a client. Um, that was just a combination of a number of things. Ultimately, there was a lack of respect in the session room toward me, toward the wife, toward a number of things, and there were inappropriate comments made and stuff like that. It was just icky, and so we've parted ways, which is just fine with me. Other than that, I don't often have visionaries who don't live their values. I mean, my visionaries are so gung-ho and walking the talk. It's really great to see.
Yeah.
I had very
Good.
passionate visionaries. Yeah. And like I said, most of the organizations I work with are faith-based organizations. And
Right,
so
that makes sense.
it's
That
about a
makes sense.
higher calling for a whole
They have
different
that
thing.
fundamental difference. That's
Yeah.
special, and good for you for finding that niche and those people and staying with it, because I am dealing with it where I have a situation where it's like, man, this is tough. There's management challenges and communication challenges, and it's like having to pull those back up is definitely a point of confrontation, right? That you have to say that's like, listen, these are what I'm managing these people with against in part, but I got to also manage you to those. So yeah, that's awesome. Well,
I
Amy,
have no problem saying you're the problem, but it's usually not about values. It's usually about a lot of other things.
I have to share this with you because it's funny. It literally lives on my desktop. I'm going to share this if I can find this share because it's quite funny. I have this thing that sits on my desktop, and it's this. Can you see it?
It's
Keep
you.
calm. And by the way, it's not me, it's you. It's literally sitting there next to my SMART
Oh my
goals
gosh.
image that I pull up sometimes. And I'm like, you sometimes you got to say, listen, I'm not the problem here. I'm trying to find the
Right.
solution, but it's
Right.
you, not me. So, Amy, what a fun session this has been. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for finding the time and carving it out of your day to chat with us. And can't thank you enough for your wisdom, and really look forward to getting to know you more. And if there's anything we can do as fractional integrators, we'd love to help. And I will make my best effort to be in Dallas on September 14th so that I
That's great.
can chat with you guys.
Awesome. And I'm going to be in Austin soon as well. I've got
Oh.
a new client in Austin that I'm onboarding. So I'll reach out.
Awesome. Well, congrats. Let me know next time you're here and maybe we can get coffee or lunch.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Scalability Code. If you made it this far, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time on the Scalability Code.